But David is the president, or David is the founder of Wallbuilders, and they're a ministry that goes all over this nation. They're called upon by senators and congressmen to say, we need help in crafting this legislation. What did the founding fathers say that is based on a biblical legacy, and what does Scripture say? And the Lord has equipped David for such a time as this, and He's also equipping all of us for such a time as this. So David, come equip us, please.
Thanks, Doc. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
I want to start with this morning, I'm going to take a word and focus on that word, and that word is truth. And focusing on the word truth, I'm not given to melodramatic hyperbole, but it's not an exaggeration to say truth is under fire in a way we've never seen in the history of America before. There's just no question about that, and that's not an overstatement. So when you look at truth and where we are, literally, I would say it's on life support in many areas. And I don't say that lightly because we do a lot of national polling. We work with a lot of national pollsters, even conduct a lot of national polling. And what we know right now is that 3 out of 5 Americans believe that there is no absolute moral truth. Now, you cannot keep a nation if you can't get 60% of people to, if 60% of people can't agree on what's right and wrong. And so when you have 60% that don't think anything's absolutely right, absolutely wrong, you got no hope for a nation. And that's really what we're sitting on the verge of right now. No nation ever survives not having a moral consensus of what's right and wrong in the nation. When you go to millennials, it's 4 out of 5 millennials believe that. So that's the next generation. So everything coming up, everything with medicine, everything with education, everything with ministry, everything with military, everything with politics, you name it, 4 out of 5 of the next generation of leaders think there is no absolute moral truth. But the good news is it's only 1 out of 2 Christians, which is pathetic. But that's the best stat in the nation. The best stat in the nation is at least half of Christians think there's absolute moral. And I don't know why half of Christians don't think there's absolute moral truth. I mean, what do we think the 10 Commandments are? The 10 Suggestions or something? I mean, it's crazy. That's absolute moral truth. God has said what's right, what's wrong. There are standards of right and wrong. But we've gone through several generations of education now where everything has become relative, and it's what you want. And so what we have now is a time where objective truth really does not matter anymore, because objective truth does not matter. There's so many categories you can point to. We can point to it in gender. 10 years ago, we all knew there was 2 genders. 3 years ago, we stopped counting when there were at least 90 genders. As of last week, they've changed the new designation to AI+. So LGBTQ AI+, or IA+, excuse me, IA+, just new, I'm still getting it. The IA+, that covers everything. But we know it's over 90 because Facebook, even 3 years ago, was still letting you have 74 genders from which you could choose in your profile. So we have gone from 2 genders 10 years ago to however many you want today, you just name it. We have the same thing with religion. All religions are good, and as a result, what we see is Christians have bought into that. The decline, particularly in the last 10 years of Christianity, it's plummeting. So Christianity in America is on its way down because anything's going to get you to heaven. As a matter of fact, if you look at current polling, 80% of Christians believe that religions other than Christianity will get an individual into heaven. And that's what Christians believe. 80% of Christians think that Jesus is not the way that you're going to get into heaven. If you read the Bible, you know what Jesus says about that. It's real simple. Actually, 52% of Christians believe that a belief in Islam will get you into heaven. You have 53% of Christians who believe that a belief in Hinduism will get you into heaven. You have 42% of Christians who believe that a belief in atheism will get you into heaven. And this one is massive to me. You don't believe there's a God, yet you think you're going to spend eternity with Him. How does that work out? I mean, that's crazy. 42% of Christians believe that a belief in atheism will get you into heaven. 56% of Christians believe a belief in no religion at all will get you into heaven. Just because you're born, you're going to heaven. Now, that's not the way the Bible teaches it. That's not correct in any theological perspective, except in the current climate where that I can make my own standards, I can make my own reality, can make my own rights and wrongs. So Christians have bought into this, and that's why, again, only 1 out of 2 Christians believes there's absolute moral truth. So when you look at where we are with religions, you have the same difficulty with government. We're convinced now that any government will work for any people. You just choose the government you want, whether it's communist, whether it's socialist, whether it's anything at all. There's 7 different forms to govern the Bible. You choose them, they're all going to be fine. No. History has shown that they will not all be fine, regardless of what you might believe. There is a record for governments. You have the same thing with education. We've changed education up now. We used to have nationally normed standardized tests, whether it be the California Achievement Test, Iowa Test of Basic Skills, Stanford Achievement Test, name it, doesn't matter. Today, every state has its own test, and that keeps us from comparing one with another. And so what we can't say is, well, Texas is 47 in the nation in reading. We don't have a clue. Well, there are some outside groups that do that, but we no longer use the same measurements. We have measurements different from state to state. We choose our own measurements, and that way we can say, as we do in Texas, that if you're an exceptional school, An exceptional school means 60% of your kids can read. Now, 60% used to be a flunking grade. So 60%, but that now makes you an exceptional school because it's not 40%. It's crazy. Everything is relative. You have the same thing with rights and wrongs. Morality's already mentioned that. With history, we now cancel any part of history we disagree with. Doesn't matter whether it happened or not. It's got to be canceled because we disagree with it. Science, we can all look at the same set of scientific studies and come up with opposite conclusions because of our worldview now. I don't believe that. I reject that, whatever it may be. Same with economics. This is why right now 75% of college students think that socialism is a better form of government than the free market. That's 69% of millennials and 41% of all Americans think that socialism is better than free market, except we have, what'd you say, Knox, 5781, is that, where'd Knox go? 5781 is the year. So we have 5,781 years of recorded history, and socialism's never worked once in 5,781 years. But it's going to work for us because nobody's ever done it the way we're going to do it. So we have a track record of something that never works, and suddenly a large portion of the nation thinks that it will work. We have the same thing with ethics. You just make your own ethics because there's no absolute right and wrong. So in all of these areas where we see this conflict, it's interesting. Truth and fact has given way to personal opinion. Personal opinion beats truth and fact every day. What I believe is more important than what you say or what you believe or what history shows. We become our own gods in many ways. And so we determine our own truth. There's no outside objective standard. Now, interesting with that, a love of the truth is what I want to talk about this morning. I'm going to start with a Bible passage. I'm going to take it to current events. The Bible passage I would go to is in Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians 2, verses 1 through 12. It talks about the man of lawlessness and the man of truth. And it goes back and forth with the two. And the way it closes and passes, or this passage, the way the passage closes in verse 10 through 12, there's a sequence. It says, they did not receive the love of the truth. So because they did not receive the love of the truth, verse 11, for this reason God will send them strong delusion. And behind the strong delusion, they'll believe that lie. And then it says that all might be damned who believe not the truth. Now, this King James, modern language, condemned, judged. But notice the sequence of what happens here. If you don't love or if you reject the truth, you don't have a love for the truth or you reject the truth, next thing happens is that a delusion will enter. And when that delusion enters, you will then believe a lie. When you believe a lie, you will act on the lie. You'll act on what you believe. So if you believe a lie, you'll act on the lie, and there's always high consequences for believing and acting on a lie. Now, there's a lot of examples. Science is an easy place to go. In science, we have what are known as the laws of gravitation. They are laws. They're not, it's not principles, axioms, theorems. A law means it never has been violated once in the history of the world. Law of gravity means it works 100% of the time, all the time, in any circumstances, does not matter. So it's really not an opinion, it is a law. So, I mean, that's the way science is built, the laws of science, laws of thermodynamics, laws of motion, laws of gases, whatever they are, they never alter. However, you got to admit, we got a lot of technology today, and we got a lot of things. I mean, you got Trump calling for putting people on Mars and getting a woman on the moon and all this. So we can do things with technology today no other generation's ever been. And as a consequence, I don't think that gravity really has the impact that it used to have in previous. As a matter of fact, I reject the idea that gravity is what drives everything. I just don't think it is. And therefore, as a result, what happens is there is no law of gravity, at least not enough to affect me. And because there's no law of gravity and it doesn't affect me, I can decide what I want to do. And one of the things I've always wanted to do is be able to jump off a building and soar. I've always wanted to be able to do that. And so I'm going to do that, and I'm going to soar all the way to my death when I hit the ground. I will die as a result. See, this is the sequence. If I reject truth, a delusion will enter. I will act on that. I'll believe a lie. I'll act on it, and I'll pay a high consequence for it. So, and may I point out, it doesn't matter how sincerely I may believe what's wrong. I'm still going to splat when I hit the ground. And actually, my personal opinion doesn't matter to gravity. It has no regard for my personal opinion. See, these are what laws are, and we've had laws throughout history. Laws of gravity, laws of nature, the laws of nature's God, the laws of the Scriptures, whatever. They're laws because they never alter. You can't change them just because you're sincere about something or you sincerely believe what's wrong. You'll still pay a price for it. So whether it's science or even whether it is faith, if we take the area of religion, Scriptures are very clear. Jesus answered, I am the way, the truth, and life. No one comes to the Father except by me. Now, that's a claim of exclusivity given in the Bible. There's no way to heaven except through Jesus. Not atheism, not Hinduism, not Islam, not some other religion. There's only one way. We're also told in Acts 4:12, there's salvation in no one else. There's no other name under heaven given among men by which we can be saved. So we have this exclusive claim. That is a spiritual law. This is just the way it works because God's the one who set it up. He can do it the way he wants to. So he set it up this way. So, but really, I know a lot of people who are not Christians who are really great people. I know some Muslims who are great people, practice Islam. I know some folks who have no religion. They're really nice people, and I can't imagine that nice people would go to hell because they just do too many things. They're charitable. They're good. There's some really nice people. So I don't think I buy this thing of Jesus is the only way to heaven. And because I don't buy that, I reject that truth, the sequence sits in again. We start with there's no exclusive way to heaven. As a matter of fact, that means there's many ways to heaven, and there are. You see all these ways. You can choose any of these ways to heaven you want, and so there's many ways to heaven, and I can choose my way to heaven, and I'm going to choose my way other than Jesus, and as a result, I will end up in hell. Just real simple. It doesn't matter how sincere I am about my beliefs. My personal opinion does not matter to God. He's the creator of the universe. I'm not. He can set it up the way he wants to. And so we're at the point where we esteem ourselves so highly and our opinions so highly, we reject absolute truth. And when you reject absolute truth, you do that in government, you do that in education, you do that in medicine, you do that in science. You get into all the stuff we've got going right now. COVID stuff is another thing where we didn't pursue truth, we pursued fear. If we'd pursued truth, it would be just fun to have a little clip of Fauci and all the corrections he's made over the last 8 months and what he said. Because we keep building policy around what he said, and about 2 weeks later he says, well, that's no longer true anymore. We still got the same policies we had 8 months ago, even though everything has changed. Possibly you've seen the news that only 9,000 total deaths have occurred as a result of COVID by itself. COVID only caused 9,000 deaths. The other were complicating factors. I thought it was 140-something thousand deaths. No, actually, even at 140-something thousand deaths, we're still way below the flu level. Now, much higher level of infection with COVID, but you may have also seen the CDC news that 90% of those who test positive for COVID didn't have enough COVID to infect anyone else. So we've been running in fear for 8 months with something that is not nearly as infectious as what we were told, nor as deadly as what we were told, and we've just cropped our lifestyle because we didn't go for absolute truth. We went on what the experts told us, what somebody else told us. This is where at some point, and we live in a culture now where you're going to have to make the decision, I'm glad you said that, but I'm going to go find what truth is. Because right now we report everybody's opinion as if it is true. And you hear that from the university level, you hear that from any level out there, and I'll show you some examples as we go through. So this is a sequence. You reject absolute truth, delusion enters, you believe a lie, you act on the lie, and there's a high cost and a consequence. And it doesn't matter whether the lie is a big lie or a little lie. There's always a consequence to it. There's always something lost when you don't believe the truth. Even if it's a small thing, you've lost a small area. So truth is the most important thing that's out there, and particularly in this culture at this time, that's really significant. So love of the truth, that's what I want to focus on this morning. I'm going to take some of the cultural things and look at it from that standpoint. So love of the truth, for Christians, we have a good indication of the starting place for truth. I mean, we're told in the scriptures in John 17:17, sanctify them by the truth, your word is truth. So God's word is the source of truth. Makes sense. He created everything. He wrote it down. We go there. That's where we get truth. So God's word is the source of truth. We're also told in other passages, Jesus says, I'm the truth. Nobody comes to the Father but me. So the person of Jesus Christ and God's word, great source of truth, great starting place to be able to have a boundary of truth. We're also told in John 8:31, 8:32, if you continue in my word, then you're my disciples, you'll know the truth, and truth will set you free. Now, I hear people quoting all the time, you know the truth, and truth will set you free. Even ESPN quotes that. No. If you continue in God's word, then you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. It's just not a matter of knowing the truth. He says, if you continue in my word, then you'll know the truth, and truth will set you free. So it goes back to that standard, and this is an area where, again, Christians are having difficulty. The polling as of this year is that only 9% of Christians read the Bible on a daily basis. So it's hard to have a standard for truth if you don't read the standard for truth. And this is why 50% of Christians think that there is no absolute truth, because they don't get into truth to even see what the truth is. One of the ways, it's like bankers, the axiom always was that Bankers, the way they learn to recognize counterfeit is they don't study counterfeit money. They handle nothing but the genuine money. And then when they handle genuine money, they can feel when something's not genuine and say, that's not right. That's it. You get in God's Word, you get a standard of truth, and then you can tell when something's not true because you have a standard by which to measure it. But if you don't have a standard by which to measure it, you can't judge what's true, and whatever sounds good, whatever the newest thing is, whatever I personally believe. And so that's the difficulty we have. Only 9% of Christians read the Bible daily. Now remember, 65% of the nation is Christian today. It's dropped 20 points in the last 20 years. It was 85% of America professed to be Christian. Now it's down to 65. But 9% of 65% means that that's only 6% of America. So only 6% of Americans read the Bible on a daily basis. Only 1 out of 16 Americans actually goes to the Bible for a source of truth, which is why we're floating in so many different directions today. This is the most biblically illiterate America has ever been in our history. It didn't matter. I was just this past weekend in Pennsylvania, and I took Ben Franklin, the least religious founding father, and showed how often he quoted the Bible, how much he knew, how much he used it. He may not have been a Christian, but this guy had a biblical worldview that passes 99% of Christians that I know today. The only difference being that he wasn't sure whether Jesus was divine, but he said 4 months before he died, but nobody's ever asked me that question before. I've never thought about it. I'm 81, and I never thought about it. So actually, at that point, he was approaching 90. He was approaching much later. Nonetheless, it's just something he had never thought about, but he had studied the Bible thoroughly, and he used it more than most Christians I know today. So only 6% of Americans read the Bible daily, and that means only 6% of Americans have a biblical worldview. So this is what part of our problem is we are so biblically illiterate that when you raise the Bible now, it seems really strange to people who have been educated with an anti-Bible mentality. Now, sometimes they don't know it's anti-Bible, but professors are very good about making sure that whatever the biblical morality is, biblical standard is, biblical truth is, they attack that. We see that regularly. We in the summertime, we have 18 to 25-year-olds that we train in the summer. And so we get what's being taught in the classroom because we hear it all summer long. Well, my professor said, well, my teacher said, well, I was told. And so we know it's out there and say that they do a great job of attacking biblical truth and undermining it, whether the kids know it's biblical truth or not. So with all of that said, this is where the supremacy of personal opinion comes in. Now, let's take this background of truth and knowing truth and being able to recognize truth and put it to what's going on in the news. And what I would choose to start with is the issue of statues. Still going down. Just this past week, El Paso, statues torn and defaced in El Paso. So this is, for the news, this is old hat. We're not covered anymore. We covered that 3 months ago. We're past that. No, it's still ongoing. And the first one I want to hit is Columbus. Columbus was the first statue that started coming down. Columbus came down, and he's been coming down for about 5 years now. Before the protest started, he was already a target. And if you wonder why Columbus is a target, what you need to do is just do a quick search on social media. Look up Columbus and see what pops up, your memes, the social media posts, etc. You get things like this. I don't always celebrate enslavement and genocide, but when I do, it's Columbus Day. So, Columbus. When we celebrate Columbus Day, we're celebrating enslavement and genocide. This one says, Savage, stop genocide, racism, and imperialism. Stop the celebration. Create hope for a new world. When we celebrate Columbus Day, we're celebrating genocide, racism, and imperialism. This is why it's now gone to Indigenous People Day. A lot of states have left the celebration of Columbus. Statues are coming down all over America. There are statue after statue. This is one of the most targeted statues that's out there, and there are so many attacks on statues of Columbus. Now, it's interesting to me that there are 600 Columbus statues. Can you guys think of any other statues? Got 600 of anything? Washington is nowhere close to that. I don't know of anybody who's even in the same ballpark with Columbus. Columbus has 600 statues, and we're trying our best to tear them all down. But here's my question. Columbus has been around for 500 years. There's lots of written materials on Columbus. We just purchased actually the second thing that was ever written about Columbus. It was published by his son, his father's writings. So there's a lot there. Washington Irving, the great literary figure who did so many literature pieces. He was ambassador to Spain, and 3 years ambassador in Spain. He spent time in the original libraries of Spain going through all the writings of Columbus and Columbus's crew and those who went with him. There's about 2,000 people that journeyed with Columbus on various voyages. He went through all that, wrote a 3-volume set on the life of Christopher Columbus, one of the most authoritative books that's out there. There's tons of original information on Columbus. So the question is, or the question I would pose is, with all the information that's out there, all the available sources are out there, all the original documents are out there, for us to have 600 statues of a genocidal maniac who's a racist, a savage, who started sex slavery. If you didn't know, by the way, that's the other thing about Columbus, is he's the original sex slave trader. So why is it that every generation for 500 years found him to be a good guy? We have to conclude that every generation before us was a bad generation, that every generation before us supported racism and supported sex slavery and supported genocide because they celebrated a really wicked guy. That's one explanation, or the explanation is maybe we don't know what they knew back then, because either they're all wrong or we're wrong, because we've got two opposite things going here, and we've had 500 years going this way, now we're swimming upstream this way. So what's going on with that? So one of the things I would say is, okay, well, what's the story of Columbus? What's the full story? Because we get sound bites now. You get those little social memes. Not going to say anything longer than that. You get what's the history, or more importantly for our discussion this morning, what's the truth? And this is where going back to original things is a lot of fun. So let me take you back to Columbus and say, all right, what's the real story? What's the truth about Columbus? And when you look at the truth about Columbus, the first question I would ask is, how many voyages did he make? Now, I can ask that to young people, I can ask that to adults, and most people say, I don't have a clue, but it really doesn't matter because he's a bad guy on every voyage. No, if you don't know how many voyages he made, you don't even know the most fundamental fact about Columbus, which means you have no basis from which to judge whether what he did was right or wrong other than what you've been told. So he made 4 voyages. Now, those 4 voyages, the first voyage is the one that we see the picture hanging in the U.S. Capitol. This is the picture of Columbus landing in New World, 1492. So this is what hangs in the Capitol. That's his first voyage. When he landed there in the New World, in the Caribbean area, there east of Florida, the first tribe he encountered were the Tainos. And he writes that the Tainos were the kindest, gentlest, best people. He said he loved these people. He told the King and Queen of Spain, these are the greatest people ever. What an addition this would make. They need to be citizens. You need to give them full rights. These people are amazing. So he has great relationships with the Taino. But the Taino said, glad you like us, but we're not the only natives that live in this area. There's also another tribe called the Canibs or the Caribs. And so the Canibs and the Caribs, Canibs is where we get the word cannibal, and Caribs is where we get the word Caribbean. So this is the tribe that's living there, and the Taino said, you need to be aware of these guys because these guys are cannibals. They kill us, they eat us, they're our mortal enemy. They kill and eat others. That they actually go from island to island in the Caribbean, and they'll live on an island several years as they depopulate it. They eat it, and they live there till all the humans are gone, then they move on to another island for food, and so they completely depopulate island after island. And Columbus, he says, nah, don't buy that. Come on, guys, this is 1492. How civilized we are, there's no way that 1492 anybody eats anybody else. And that was his attitude. So he did not believe what he was told about that report. Now, having made good relations with the Tainos, he said, I'm going back to Spain, get more ships, more supplies. This is a great place. We have a great relationship. What a wonderful place. So he goes back, and as he starts to go back, one of his ships runs aground. That ship that runs aground damages the bottom so severely that he can't get it back to Spain. So what he says to the guys on the ship is, all right, I'm taking the other ships back. You guys stay here. We got great relationships with the Taino. Things are good. I'll be back very quickly because I'm just going to get supplies and coming back. So he leaves. They actually build a fort for the guys so they have a place to stay. So they live in this fort. And Columbus sets sail back for Spain to start his second journey to come back with more ships and more colonists and more supplies. So while he's gone, the Tainos, the Canibs, attack his guys and kill his guys and cannibalize his guys. In the midst of cannibalizing his guys, the Tainos find out about it. They come. They don't get there in time to save any person, but they keep them from being fully cannibalized. So when Columbus arrives back, he sees his men. They're partially eaten. First thing that the Canibs do is they scoop out the eyeballs because they think that's a delicacy. So all of his guys has just been mutilated, and it's horrible, and he can't believe what he's seeing. And so at that point in time, he talks to the Tainos and said, what happened? They said, well, these are the guys we told you about, and we told you that they didn't like anybody and they would kill and eat, and this is what happened. We tried to save them, but we got there too late to do it. So Columbus then sets out for the Canib villages. He's looking for the Canib villages, and he gets into a village in which he finds a bunch of Taino women. There are 50 huts in that village. And as he goes into that village and finds the 50 huts, he finds all these Taino women, and that's his allies, that's friends. He goes, first off, there's no cannabis here. Second off, what are you guys doing here? And they said, well, actually, we're the sex slaves for the cannibs. What they do is they rape us, and all the children we produce, they eat. We're the food factory for them. We're the food farm for them. And the women went on to tell Columbus and his men, they said, listen, the cannibs, they don't like eating children or women. They like eating babies and full-grown men. As a matter of fact, this is what they told the guys. Said, when the Caribbees take any boys as prisoners, they remove their organs, fatten the boys till they grow to manhood, and then when they wish to make a great feast, they kill and eat them, for they say the flesh of boys and women is not good to eat. So this is what Columbus has found. He then frees all those women, gets them out of there, gets them out of the camp. The cannibals aren't there. They've gone to another island to attack and get food and bring back people from that island. So Columbus continues to search for the cannibals. He liberates the Taino women. He searches for the cannibals, and he fights the cannibals. He fights the cannibals, and when he does, this is what's called the Age of Conquest back then. And when you have the Age of Conquest, and you defeat an enemy, there's really only two options for what you can do when you defeat an enemy. You either kill them or you enslave them. Now, think about how this works. When you have a culture so barbaric, so backward, and so twisted that everything civilized about them is opposite, you don't just kind of sit down and negotiate with them. Hey, you guys are cannibals, that's really not a good deal. We need to wean you off of that. Why don't you just eat humans every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday? You know, we'll drop the other. You don't do that. I mean, this is something that's got to come to a screeching halt. This is why God told the Israelites going in the Promised Land, he said, when you get there, you're going to have to destroy all of them, because they sacrifice their children, they burn their families. This is such a twisted culture. You just can't go in and live among them. You got to get rid of this thing. And so that's essentially what happens here. So kill and enslave. Now, let me give a modern day example. If I take ISIS, we know how barbaric and how uncivilized ISIS. We know how twisted their thinking is. One of the organizations that help run is called the Nazarene Fund. We started the Nazarene Fund about 6 years ago when ISIS was at its heyday in the Middle East, and we used the Islamic symbol for a Christian. It's called the symbol Nun, and so that's a symbol we use in the organization. And we literally go in and save Christians. Sex slavery especially is big to ISIS. And we would go in and pull people out. And we did that not in a diplomatic sense. We did that in a military sense. We hired Kurdish fighters. Kurdish fighters are Muslims. They hate Islam. They hate ISIS, and they love Christians. And so these Kurds were willing to go in and get the sex slaves, these Christian sex slaves, away from ISIS and get them out. So two of our guys got killed on various missions. One guy's been shot 17 times. He keeps going back to get these. Just last week, we took 12 more away from ISIS, or what's left of ISIS. I mean, ISIS is just twisted, and going in and taking guys away, you don't negotiate with them, and you don't give them money to get them. It's bad stuff. So when you look at ISIS, the fact that over the last 5 years they've been basically exterminated from the Middle East. And they're not gone. They're down in Africa now doing a lot of stuff in Africa, but they have been chased out of the Middle East. We went in, Trump got very serious about what was going on, and we just put an end to that, just like Iran and just like so many other things, just put an end to it. So having said that, when you look at how we essentially exterminated ISIS out of the Middle East, are we going to call that a genocide today? Because it's a whole lot like what happened with Columbus. He went in and took care of a culture that was destroying and killing everything except itself, bringing havoc to everywhere we went. We don't call that a genocide, taking ISIS out. So what happens today is we're actually defending the cannibals against Columbus. Now, if you've ever been on a cruise in the Caribbean, I will point out there's no longer cannibals you have to worry about when you go to the Caribbean. That's not the issue anymore. See, we have history so twisted, we don't even know what the story was about. We just assume sex slavery? No, that's not what Columbus did. That's what the cannibals did. So we've got the story all backwards on this thing. Now, on the second trip, when Columbus went back and then the second trip, some Tainos actually asked to go back to Spain with him. And he said, well, if you guys want to, it's fine. They got back to Spain and were made members of the royal court. See, the Spanish thought this is a really good group and we need to honor them and we need to do things with them. But Columbus also took back some of the remaining cannibals. Said, you won't believe, these guys actually eat people. They ate my men. And so he took some, so that's the enslavement we're talking about. The enslavement that Columbus did of Native Americans were of the remaining cannibals, that just to show how barbaric they were. See, that's what happened in the Old Testament as well. And we don't call that a genocide. I mean, because we established a brand new nation, Israel, who brought liberty and brought so many things to the Middle East. So but that's not all of it. There's actually more to the story than this, because we're also told that the reason Columbus did all that he did was he wanted gold. That was what motivated him more than anything else. But, it's a good chance that there might be more to that claim, just like there was more to the first claim. There might be more to the story than what we hear. So let me take that a bit. Did Columbus, was he seeking gold? Because that's the other thing. Even in Christian textbooks, we see that Columbus was seeking gold. And there's more to the story. Now, to understand why Columbus was doing what he did, you have to understand the Crusades. If you don't understand the Crusades, you won't get what's going on. And the Crusades, to even understand the Crusades, and I have not reviewed an American history textbook that does not cover the Crusades. Every one of them do. But what they don't cover is the background of the Crusades. There's three questions you got to be able to answer about the Crusades, and that is who was involved, where did they occur, and why did they occur. Now, I've not seen an American history textbook cover that very well at all. But if you take it, they all occurred over here in the Middle East. These are all Christian crusades, depending on which historian you look at. Those Christian crusades, they all occurred in the Middle East. And you see right here in the Middle East, there's some up in Turkey. These up in Turkey, that's where the 7 churches were in the book of Revelation. So this is where this is where Christianity had spread. At the time of the Crusades, which you go back to about 700 AD, Crusades start. And so all along here, this is where Christianity has spread and started moving across the world. Now, the number of Christian crusades range from 13 to 17, depending on which book you read. So there's these Christian crusades, and they're in the Middle East and the surrounding regions. Who were they fighting? They were fighting Muslims. Muslims had crusades too. As a matter of fact, the Muslims actually had 548 crusades. Now, Christians had 13 to 17. How come every American history book I see covers the Christian crusades and never the Muslim crusades? How come it's all about how the Christians mistreated everyone and they went in and they killed all these Muslims? And these are all the Muslim crusades up here. And if you look at these crusades and see where they occurred, let me point you right here. This is where Columbus grew up. He grew up there in Italy. Now remember, that's the church at Rome, the book of Romans. Paul went there, started the church. Christianity was doing really well in Italy. And so Muslims attacked that because that's a center of Christianity. Columbus, as a young man, actually fought Muslims as they attacked him and tried to kill him and the villages around. So he's got very real experience with these crusades. He was in them as a young man. But he is now sailing for Spain. Look at Spain. Oh my gosh, that's all red. Yeah, because Spain is a place where the Apostle Paul went, brought Christianity, and it flourished in Spain, just took off. So we got to attack there. So there's lots of Muslim attacks in Spain and Morocco both. And then you see the other hot spot is there in the Middle East, because this is a land of Christians and Jews, and we can't have this going on. And so Islam is a conquering religion. They've got to go conquer whatever is there. And if you're not really aware, when you see a mosque or minaret across the Middle East, it's there because they celebrate that as a place where they conquered Christians or Jews. This is why people got so upset when they wanted to build a mosque at the site of 9/11, because that's how they celebrate. That's forgive me for saying this, but I say this when we take tours to Israel. When you see a mosque, it's like a dog peeing on the ground to mark its territory. That's how they mark their territory. This is where we conquered someone. This is where we had a battle. This is where we defeated the enemy. And so if you take a tour of the Middle East, and we take people to Israel once or twice a year, Caesarea. Now this is where Paul set out. This is with missionary journeys of Paul. This is where Herod was. This is his summer palace. And notice the minaret and mosque. Why? Because the Muslims went in and conquered this place where the missionary Paul had launched out to take the gospel so many other places. So every Christian Jewish place in Israel that is of biblical significance has been conquered by Muslims and has an old minaret and old mosque. If you go to Bethlehem, that's the birthplace of David and that's the birthplace of Jesus. Bethlehem is now a Muslim town. If you go to Nazareth, where Jesus was raised, the boyhood home of Jesus, Nazareth is a Muslim town. It is marked with minarets and mosques. If you go to the Temple Mount, that's the third most holy place in Islam, because they conquered it, because that you got Abraham and Jesus, part of the temple story. You can't have that, so it's been conquered. If you go to Caesarea Philippi, this is where Jesus told the apostles, the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. This is where really the New Testament church got birth, was there, and they conquered that. anywhere that has biblical significance, Muslims went and conquered. And so what happens at the time of Columbus, he's very concerned about the fact that the Holy Land is now in the hands of Muslims, because it was at the time he was there. He writes in his journals, he talks about the fact, he said, I've read the theologians, I've talked to the theologians, they all agree that Jesus will be back within 155 years. Now, who knows why 155 years, but that's what the prophecies were saying back then to them. They said, Jesus is going to be back in 155 years. We cannot have him come back to a Holy Land that is filled with people who will kill Christians and Jews and whatnot. So he asked for money to be able to go redeem the Holy Land. He was looking for gold, and what he told the king and queen of Spain, he says, I wish that all the profits of this my enterprise may be sent in the conquest of Jerusalem. I want to get Jerusalem back in the hands of Christians and Jews and out of the hands of those who are killing the Christians and Jews. So, yeah, he did want gold, but it wasn't to build a 43-story castle that had his name on it. It was to take back the Holy Land because he believed Jesus, the return of Jesus, was imminent. So you've got his journals, and he has the various journals, but he also has these book of prophecies. This came at the time of his fourth journey. And if you can, I don't read Italian, but that's Ezekiel, you can see right here. And then you've got Ezekiel chapter 28, Ezekiel chapter 32, Ezekiel chapter 34, Ezekiel chapter 35, Ezekiel chapter 36. He read through the scriptures, and everywhere the Lord spoke to him about what was coming or what was happening, he wrote it down. This is like his spiritual journal of all the things the Lord was showing him out of the scriptures. So he's reading just through the scriptures. This is a spiritual notebook. So when you look at Columbus, I mean, this is what he says in the Book of Prophecies. I have seen and put in study to look into all the scriptures. Our Lord opened my understanding. I could sense his hand upon me. All those who heard about my enterprise rejected it with laughter, scoffing at me. He says, who doubts that this illumination is from the Holy Spirit? I attest that he, the Spirit, with marvelous rays of light, consoled me through the holy and sacred scriptures. No one should be afraid to take on any enterprise if it's in the name of our Savior, if it is right and the purpose is purely for his holy service. Now, that's not the Columbus we hear today. But that's why 500 statues got built, or 600 statues got built to him over the previous 500 years. We knew all sorts of different... We had his writings. We read his writings. I have never talked to a young person today or an adult today who has read his writings. They just know what they've been told about him. And so nobody's really defending Columbus statues, because I don't want to get in front of that bus. Everybody knows that he's the one who started the sex slave trade. I'm not going to defend that. No, that's not what happened. So that's just an example of truth. The true story is quite different from what we hear. But going to Proverbs 18:17 is one of two verses that was used to help build what we call the due process system, the Bill of Rights, the 4th through 8th Amendment. Proverbs 18:17 says, one side sounds right until the other is heard. We're told out of John that you have the right to confront your accuser. Jesus is actually the one who set that up in John 8:12. And between that verse that Jesus used and this verse is why we have the adversarial system in court. You see, we have defense attorneys and we have prosecuting attorneys. If you listen to the defense attorney, we would release everybody who got arrested. If you listen just to the prosecuting attorney, we would convict everybody who got arrested. So what we have is an adversarial process where you have to listen to both sides and then determine where truth lies in it. And that's what a jury does. They're truth finders. So that's the way we used to be trained as Americans is, yeah, I've heard your side. Let's check the other side. We don't do that anymore. We hear a side, we make a judgment on it, we're on that side. And that's where so much of the culture is today. Whatever, if Fauci says something, that's it. How about all the doctors that Facebook won't let talk? And how about the voices they've cut off? Because they have just shut down the other side. We're not having a discussion. We're having a one-side agenda. And so we don't love truth anymore. We love a position. We take a position. We'll defend our position whether it's right or not. And that's where the culture is headed. So this is why people who speak the truth are considered a threat in the culture today, because where the culture's headed, they don't want truth. And that includes a lot of Christians as well. I would say the biggest adversaries I have are Christians. It's Christians who hate what I do more than other people hate what I do. Although a lot of the secular guys spend a lot of money against us to make sure that our voice doesn't get heard, there's still Christians who are our most vocal critics. So when truth is the issue, expect to have some opposition. Acts 17:11, I love what happened here. This is with the Apostle Paul. He's on his second missionary journey. He's just been at Thessalonica, which got the church going there really good. As a matter of fact, that's where you get 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. As he leaves Thessalonica, he ends up in Berea, and he says, those in Berea were more noble than those in Thessalonica, in that they received the word with all readiness of mind and searched the Scriptures daily to see whether the things I told them were true. They're hearing things they've never heard before, and I'm telling them the Scriptures, but they say, wait a minute, time out. We're going to go check the Scriptures for ourselves. I know you quoted the Scriptures, but until I see them myself, I'm not convinced. Paul said, I love these guys. They don't want my hearsay. They want the actual evidence. They want to go see what's there. And see, this is a habit we're going to have to redevelop in America, but it means work. You can't go find the other side today because it's not readily available. You have to dig for it. It's there, all the old books. Good thing about books.google.com, Google Books, they have millions of old historical books unedited on the web. You can go read those 3-volume sets of The Life of Christopher Columbus by Washington Irving. Read it for yourself. See what the actual documents say as opposed to what the memes say today. But that means work. Yes, it does. It means that if you're going to get truth, you have to be like the Bereans. You have to dig in the Scriptures for yourself and see what it actually says. And so, who cares what memes say or the headlines say, or who cares what the sound bites are? Who cares what the tickers are along the bottom of the screen, whether it's Fox or CNN, MSNBC? It doesn't matter. Find truth. Go to truth. Each side's got their own view of truth. Which one is the actual view of truth that God's going to side with? So love of the truth is the big thing. Now, having said that, let me get back into statues for a minute because I showed you Columbus. Let's keep going. We're told that the statues that are coming down across America is because of racism, and that's why the statues being removed, and particularly what's been targeted are Confederate statues or statues of racists. So, and I've seen a lot of Christians buy onto this, a lot of pastors are signing on with BLM because they don't want black lives to be disregarded. They think that black lives should matter. They're signing on not even understanding what the movement's about because what they've heard on the news and what the news is reporting is a soundbite of what's going on. See, it's really not about racism, and it's not about removing statues of racists. And how do we know that? Well, this is a good start. This statue of David Farragut in D.C., Farragut Square in D.C. is a big square. He's a Union admiral who left the South and went to the North to fight against slavery. He's one of the loudest voices against slavery. Why would you tear down one of the loudest voices against slavery and racism? We tore him down. We also have Abraham Lincoln. There's a college right now trying to get the statues of Abraham Lincoln down because Abraham Lincoln owned slaves, except he never owned slaves. He's the great emancipator. He's the guy who ended slavery, lost his life as a result of the hatred for those who didn't like the fact he ended slavery. The first 23 civil rights laws in America. So many things about this guy. And actually, the statues that they're tearing down now, the mayor of Boston taking this one down, this is a statue that was actually paid for by slaves who had been freed in the Emancipation Proclamation. They raised money themselves, built that statue. Frederick Douglass, the great civil rights leader, gave the oration at the dedication of that statue. This is done by people who were freed by the actions of Abraham Lincoln, and we're tearing it down today because he's a great racist? No. Well, how about this one? The Soldier and Sailors Monument in Cleveland, except it's the Union soldiers and the Union sailors monument. So we're vandalizing Union soldiers and Union sailors? Or this one, Ulysses S. Grant? Now, wait a minute. Ulysses S. Grant is the guy who led the military that defeated the Confederacy. You're telling me you're tearing down Confederate statues? How about the leader of the Union forces who not only defeated the Confederacy, but then he became president of the United States? He passed 6 civil rights laws, including the first law that banned the Ku Klux Klan. So he's a great civil rights hero. We've got to deface him. Then we've got the Mass 54th. The Mass 54th is the first black regiment in the military in the Civil War. It's out of Massachusetts. The 54th and 55th Regiment were started by Frederick Douglass, the great black civil rights leader. Frederick Douglass's own son fought in the Mass 54th. If you've ever seen the movie Glory, it's about the Mass 54th. So this, up at Wallbuilders, we actually have the law that was passed as a result of these guys doing so well in the military, and that law says black and white soldiers in the military treated equal. They get the same rations, they get the same pay, they get the same everything. That's a breakthrough regiment that achieved civil rights in the military, and we're going to deface it? It's a Union regiment. And then you've got Frederick Douglass himself is torn down in Rochester, New York. Now tell me how he's a racist and how he's part of the Confederacy and part of slavery. And then Theodore Roosevelt. This is New York. I don't know how they can do that. I mean, how do you have Night at the Museum without Teddy Roosevelt? And this is the museum. This is the New York Museum where Teddy Roosevelt's statue is. They're taking it down because he's a racist. Time out. This poster came out in 1901 because he started race riots by inviting blacks to the White House and having them eat at the White House with him. This is Booker T. Washington. It was equality. He had just become president. Now, blacks had been at the White House several times before this, Frederick Douglass and Robert Smalls and so many others, but no black had ever eaten at the White House until this happened. And what happened, Teddy Roosevelt writes that he was writing Booker T. Washington to invite him to the White House, and he said, I started to ask him to stay for dinner, and I realized if I do that, we're going to have race riots because the races will go through the roof. And then he said, and then as soon as I thought that, I was ashamed of myself, and I wrote Booker T. and said, I insist you stay for dinner at the White House. I don't care if it starts riots or not. We're going to break through this thing. And so Booker T. then had to decide, because he knew that if he stayed for dinner at the White House, it was going to create riots, and it did. Both of them knew the cost. Both of them did it. It did create riots. As a matter of fact, for the next several years, there were hired assassins paid to kill Booker T. Washington for having eaten at the White House with a white president. So he knew that, and that's why it says equality, because he's a breakthrough guy that did something that had never been done, and now we're going to take his statue down. All the Founding Fathers have to come down. Caesar Rodney, President Trump talked about this week. I was on a call with the White House, President Trump. This week, he's been meeting with historians to reestablish patriotic education in American schools, because we don't do it anymore. We hate America more than other nations hate us, and we teach that in education. And he gave this as an example. This guy, Caesar Rodney, the state quarters, you look on the back of the state quarter, for the Delaware State Quarters, got Caesar Rodney riding a horse, his cloak going behind him. He got there in time to vote for the Declaration of Independence and help America become an independent nation. And now he's coming down. He's an anti-slavery guy among the Founding Fathers who fought slavery back in his day. And now we got to think, yeah, he's a Founding Father. That means he's a racist or Founding Father. You have the same thing with Ben Franklin over here. This is Washburn University School of Law in Kansas. They took it down. Ben Franklin started the first abolition society in America and was part of the national abolition movement in America. He's a huge breakthrough guy. And by the way, the Founding Fathers, about 1/4 of them were pro-slavery. 3/4 were anti-slavery. And they're taking down the anti-slavery guys. They just want all founders gone. Philip Schuyler, who helped us win the first major battle in the Revolution, the Battle of Saratoga, he's got to come down. You've got Count Pulaski. He's a general from Poland who came to America to fight. He hated slavery, came here to help us fight and be free from the British. You have Thaddeus Kosciuszko, who did the same thing. He's another Polish general who came here to help us be free. This one's interesting. Why in the world would you vandalize Louis XVI statue? Anybody know what Louis XVI did that would get him vandalized? He's the French general. He's the French king who said, we need to help America in the American Revolution. Let's send us our Navy. Let's send them our Army. He's the guy who just supported Americans. For supporting Americans, that gets him vandalized just because he helped support Americans. Then you've got the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Philadelphia of the American Revolution. That's vandalized as well. How is that racism? But let's not stop there. Activist says statues of Jesus Christ are a gross form of white supremacy. Tear them down. So we see across the nation statues of Jesus being beheaded. That was the statue that got hit this week in El Paso was a statue of Jesus, marble statue, took the head off Jesus. The Virgin Mary, this is a Catholic statue that had been erected for servicemen killed during World War II. Catholic servicemen killed in World War II, a memorial to them. They set it on fire, tried to burn it and destroy it. This is in Miami, church in Miami. It had been outside after it got decapitated. They moved it inside to try to protect it, repair it. This is Junipero Serra. He is the Christian missionary who opened the American Southwest. He's the founder of California. He started missions across California, but his statues have to come down because as a Christian, he's a murderer. And by the way, the church that he started back in 1771 in California, they set it on fire, destroyed it. They've looked for churches across California, mission churches they're burning down. 4 of them have been burned down now. This church closes after vandals painted satanic symbols on the outside of Connecticut Parish. Over the course of a week, 11 churches were desecrated intact. So that's spread out. It's going all across the nation. The media doesn't seem to be talking about this very much, but it's out there. It's spreading. Burning St. John's Church in D.C., the Church of the Presidents. John Adams started attending there. All the presidents have attended there, and they didn't get it completely burned, so they came back the next week to do it again. Let's get that church out of there. 10 Commandments have to go. You have Bibles and flags being burned by rioters in Portland. You have the Armenian Genocide Memorial. This is a memorial to Christians who were killed by Muslims in World War I in Armenia. Huge genocide memorial to slaughtered Christians. That's got to be defaced. We can't have those Christian guys. Here's one. A sculpture of escaping slave vandalized the BLM group. She's an escaping slave. She came to the north and became a nurse on the Union side in the north, and we've got to deface her. This is at a church. This is a Baptist church in Albany, Indiana. Elvis Presley, BLM. And by the way, see BLM here? Now, what did Elvis Presley do? I'm not quite sure why he's a Confederate racist. Maybe because he's from Tennessee. Who knows? But nonetheless, see a BLM here? BLM is painted on so many of the statues. But notice something else? See the communist symbol there? Look at the communist symbol beside BLM on so many of these statues. See, this is more about hate America than it is about fight racism. But you get the media to say this is about fighting racism, everybody gets on board. It's more about hating America because you're taking down all the pro guys, you're taking down the anti-slavery guys, you're taking down the racial equality guys, you're even taking down the racial equality leaders like Frederick Douglass. It's just destroy America is what it is. And that's what the communists are after, and that's their objective. So you look at this, there were 12 statues that were taken down in Washington, D.C. You have World War I Memorial in Pittsburgh. Now, what's World War I have to do with racism? And by the way, notice the communist symbol again. Here's the World War I Memorial in Kansas City. Here's the World War I Memorial in Birmingham. Here's the World War II Memorial in Washington, D.C. Here's the World War II Memorial in Indiana, the World War II Memorial in Merced, California. This was a list of all the guys from Merced who died during World War II, and this got to be defaced. Here's the World War II Memorial in Charlotte. I mean, it just keeps going on and on and on. Even the 9/11 Memorial is attacked and defaced. So none of this lines up. This may be the best example. Clayton Jackson McGee Memorial vandalized during protests in Duluth. Clayton Jackson McGee, these guys right here, those three guys were black guys who were wrongly lynched just because they were black. So this is a monument to honor the victims of racial inequality. And we're going to destroy that monument too. Doesn't line up with what we're being told. So it is more about hating America than anything. And we don't put up statues to people because they're perfect. I feel stupid saying that. I can't believe anybody thinks anybody's perfect. But we don't put up statues to people because they're perfect. Because we're Christians, we know that all of sin falls short of the glory of God. We know from the Old and New Testament that there's none righteous, no, not one. So we don't put up statues for people who are perfect. So who should be celebrated? Who should we put up statues? Who should be honored? Answer to that is found with Noah. If you find in Genesis chapter 6 is where we get introduced to Noah. Now remember, God made Adam and Eve, and then you had Abel and Cain and Seth and etc. And so what happens is Cain kills Abel, and it goes downhill from there. The world goes so bad, God says, let's just wipe them all out. Let's start again. There's no way of redeeming this. So we have the flood, and we're told in Genesis 6:9 that Noah was chosen because he was a righteous man, Genesis 6:9. Except that's not all the verse says. It says he was a righteous man in his generation. Now, why does this matter? Because in Genesis 9, when he gets off the ark, he's fall down dead drunk, gets his kids into trouble, all sorts of trouble. He's not a perfect guy by a long shot. But see, while he may have had trouble with drunkenness, he wasn't killing people and raping people, and he wasn't doing all the stuff the rest. In his generation, he was light years ahead of everybody else. See, what he did was he took it and moved the culture forward in the right direction. And that's who you honor. You don't honor perfect people because there is none. You look at people who took and moved Columbus moved the world forward in his day. Perfect guy? Absolutely not. But is he so much better than what was going on? Is he so much better than the cannibals? Yeah, he is. And he helped move the world forward in a good direction. So we honor him for that, not because he's perfect. See, and that's what we're missing is the biblical perspective. We honor people who help move the ball down the court. So that love of the truth is really significant. Now, here's our assignment with loving the truth. Loving the truth means you have to first find the truth. And today, that means some hard work. Because it doesn't come, it's not even in our textbooks anymore. Some maybe, but I don't even trust textbooks written by our guys anymore. Because so many of them quote what they were told by their professors, And it's no longer going back to original sources. The whisper game, where we whisper the thing to one another, goes around the room. One professor teaches another, well, he's a Christian professor, but he was taught by a pagan professor. And so no longer do we go back to the source of truth like we used to. No longer do we drive students to source of truth. We now use textbooks and curriculum and online stuff. And all that's fine. I'm not complaining about that. But I'm just saying you have to make sure that it's actually true. Just because it comes from a Christian publisher or a Christian news site doesn't mean it's actually true. One of the great things going right now, everybody know who John MacArthur is, what's going on in California with his church, being arrested for having church. He's disobeying civil government. About 28, 30 years ago, when California was first facing gay marriage, they were the second state to address it. Vermont had said we're going to have gay marriage, civil unions. And so California said they were going to do that, and people with Prop 8 said, no, we're not going to do that. So Prop 8 was up. So I was asked to go to California, and several leaders, we all traveled to California, held 22 different meetings, and John MacArthur was one of the guys who traveled, and we all held these meetings together. So at that point in time, I would talk about how America was founded, the values of America, biblical base on which it was founded, the founding fathers, what they did. And then John said there is not a single founding father who was a Christian. They were all atheists and agnostics and deists. And he said, plus God will never bless America because they committed civil disobedience. They did not obey their leaders. When they did not obey King George III, there's no way God can bless them. Guess what? He's now into civil disobedience. He's had an epiphany. He's now telling the Governor Newsom, you're not going to shut my church down. Exactly. That's what the king was doing back then. And the guy said, no, you're not going to do it. So regardless of how you've been taught, John at least has come to a different knowledge of the truth because he actually is experiencing some things that he's never had before. So having said that, it's hard work, but on top of that, we've been coasting for a long time. We just trusted people. They're not malicious. They wouldn't lie to me. Well, they don't. They're just repeating lies that somebody else told them, and so it gets passed on and on and on. So our good intentions, not enough anymore. It's not the fact that Fox has got good intentions. They're trying to do it. You can't even trust that. If you're a conservative, you got to make sure you know what the truth is. And so that does mean hard work. Columbus is a great example. Probably 1 out of 100 Americans might know the information I shared this morning about Columbus. But more than that, or Bible-believing people, conservatives, we just don't know the information. And so that means to love the truth now means you have to work hard to find the truth. The other thing is you have to be willing to defend the truth. And defending the truth takes a lot of courage. We have polling from 3 weeks ago where that 77% of traditional value Americans now self-censor due to the current cultural climate. I'd rather not say anything because I will get attacked if I do, and I don't want to get attacked. So those of us that know the truth are now self-censoring because the climate is so hostile. Guess what? That's not going to help anybody not go down the wrong path. Now we're going to let everybody swim with the lies because we're not saying what the truth is and pulling some people over to the shore. Can't do it. But it takes a lot of courage, and this is where, the Founding Fathers had their problems when they spoke out against King George III. That was sedition, and they ended up in court. And you still got to have courage to speak the truth. And so that's a decision we've all got to make. So Revelation 21:8, fearful and cowardly have no place in heaven. If we're scared of standing up for stuff, that's not a Christian characteristic. If you think this is where our life is, got that wrong. This is just a passing through place to where life's going to be. So what happens here is not nearly as important as what happens there. I would rather spend all of eternity enjoying myself and have some problems here than have problems there. So cowardly, not part of this, but the church has become cowardly, and I say that polling-wise right now, only 2.8% of pastors in America are willing to address what's going on in the culture. So why won't we address what's going on in the culture? We should be. We Christians have the answers to what's going on in the culture, but we're not sharing them with folks. So that's the third thing. So just summing it up, truth, it's all about loving the truth and finding the truth and defending the truth, and that's really what we have to do. This is a new time in America. It's a new time for American Christians. We're not used to doing these things, but we have to start again as if it's brand new because we have a culture that has moved so far in the direction of non-truth that you just can't live in that culture anymore. So this is what our focus is. That's what we got to do. Knox, give it back to you, bro.